like? Well, she got immediately interested. And she had to find out about everything. She was a person who was an excellent researcher. So before we left the shop, she spent about $200 or $300 on books and a diffuser and oils, and she was into it. And so she was off and running, wanting to learn everything she could know, get to know about oils, about essential oils. And so when Dr. David Stewart, my college roommate, approached her about Young Living, she said, I don't want to hear about any multi-level marketing companies, just not interested in that stuff. You know, we've already got a business of our own, environmental consulting firm. And she said, I just not interested in it. And he said, well, okay, let me tell you a little bit about it. And if you're not interested, then, I'll never talk about it again. Well, that was the beginning. And she had to go and also meet Gary and Mary Young and visit the farms and the diffuser, and I'm sorry, the distilleries and everything. So that was the beginning. And then since we had come back to Missouri, I had worked for the U.S. Geological Survey for a number of years as a mathematical modeler of environmental systems, a systems analyst for the Department of Interior, and had worked in 12 different states and 2 or 3 foreign countries over my career. And we had come back to Missouri to take care of my mother after my father passed away. And we had started business of our own. And so we were together 24/7, and we discussed everything. So I had a client that had a mold problem. As an environmental engineer, one of the things that I did was what are called environmental site assessments, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, which are inspections and sampling and sometimes designing remediation for a particular problem. Mold would just be one of them. And I had the client who was he had purchased a 24-unit apartment complex that had been partially flooded and invaded by massive amounts of mold. It had been closed down in the humid summertime of southern Missouri. And mold had just gone rampant. And they were trying to deal with it and get the complex renovated so that it could be rented by people. And he had to meet certain requirements for a number of environmental problems, like lead paint and radon and mold and so forth. So I was hired to do the sampling after the cleaning had been done. And they had hired a cleaning company, and they were going through and renovating, repairing the water damage that had been done. They were taking out water damaged materials and moldy materials, and they were replacing windows and doors and roofs and just generally trying to get it into shape so that it could be rented. And they everything, they passed everything, the standards and everything, but mold became a problem because it, after the cleaning company had gone through, and they hired me to take samples to make sure that they had no problems. They did. They had problems. The mold levels in roughly a third of the 24 apartments was extremely high. The air was full of mold spores, and the mold had penetrated into the walls, and there was a big problem. And even after the cleaning, there was still a problem. And they had used bleach and something called Kills, which is a industrial cleaner, but there was still mold. So the owner asked me to meet with the cleaning company representatives, and I said, well, have them bring their MSDS sheets along so I can see what they've used to treat the mold problem. And they did. And when I looked at the MSDS sheets, I saw that the main cleaning agent was a bactericide. It was not a fungicide. And I said, this is fine, but it isn't doing the job. And they said, well, our supplier said this is the perfect thing because it's a thing that hospitals use in their clean rooms and so on and so forth. And I said, well, it's a bactericide, it's not a fungicide. And so there are certain fungi here, certain mold species that it's just not doing the job. And even if it's killing them for a short period of time, the conditions are still such that they are just rebounding and taking over again within a day or two. And so they said, well, what should we do? And I said, well, go back and get a industrial strength fungicide and go through and clean again, and I'll come back afterward and do the sampling and, make sure that its problem's taken care of. Well, they did that, and it still wasn't taken care of. So the client said, what do? We spent a ton of money here, and we can't rent these apartments. So what do we do? So I was discussing this with Jacqui, and while we were having lunch or in the evening after supper, and told her this big problem that my client had. And she said, well, maybe you should try essential oils, because if you look on the bottle here, it says fungicide. It says it will kill bacteria and fungi and so forth. And I said, okay, that sounds good, but you've got these little bottles, 15 milliliter bottles. How do I apply that? And she said, well, you're the engineer. That's for you to figure out. So, okay. Now I have another problem. If I go to an engineering client and say, I'm going to solve your problem with aromatherapy, they're just going to laugh. And she said, well, don't call it aromatherapy. Tell them you found a fungicide that you'd like to try. And I said, okay, but do a little research for me and find out if there have been studies done showing which of the essential oils are effective against mold. Well, She did. She came back with a big stack of papers on academic studies, mostly university studies, with mold and petri dishes and so forth, because at that time, uh, apparently, as far as we could find, nobody had actually used essential oils to uh, treat a mold problem in the field. There were these academic studies, petri dishes in the laboratory. So I went to my client and I said, okay, I've got something we can try. Um, and if you will, I will donate my time and the equipment. And uh, by this time, I'd done my homework and had figured out, okay, how do you apply this? And the diffuser, and I had seen those at work, was the obvious solution because it had the ability to saturate the air with oil, very fine oil droplets. And so uh, in some ways, perhaps we were just lucky because I said to the client, "This is an experiment. You know, we'll see if it works." And they said, "Well, we have no choice because we tried everything else. So let's do it." And I said, well, I want to take samples before and after, immediately before and immediately after the diffusing. So we'll have a documentation of the effect of doing this. And I figured out that in the size of the rooms were, they were about 800 to 1,000 square feet of floor space. That space would take several hours to reach the saturation point, and then you have to maintain the saturation point. It's called dwell time for the mold spores to be killed, and for the mold on surfaces to be eliminated. And so, the obvious thing was let's do it for 24 hours because I'll come back after 24 hours and take samples again and see what the effects are. So that's what we did. And the data showed that it had a very profound effect, that in fact, the species of concern were totally gone. And so the client said, well, that's great, but we've tried all these other things. We used mold, we used the bactericide, we used the industrial strength fungicide, and it rebounded. It just kept coming back because the conditions were still, humidity was high and mold spores were in the air, and it just reestablished itself within about 24 hours. And so how do we know that this won't do the same thing, that a rebound? And I said, well, we don't. This is an experiment. So I'll don't do any more treatment of any kind, and I'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll see what the result was. And they said, well, we can't stop work. We have to keep the carpenters and the plumbers and electricians working to complete their job of replacing wall materials and windows and doors and the roof and everything. And I said, well, that's fine. Just don't do any kind of treatment for the mold. And when I came back in 2 weeks, it actually was as good or better than it was the day after the 24-hour diffusing. So I said, well, this is great because we have a residual effect. We have this effect going on for at least 2 weeks after, even with people going in and out the doors and, the ambient air circulation and everything, you still are in good shape as far as what the samples show. Air samples and swab samples and bulk samples all show that while there are still some ubiquitous mold spores, they're not the kind that cause problems. They're much lower in concentration than in the outside ambient air. So that tells me that it's still working after 2 weeks. So that was amazing. And that was the beginning. And so the book then consisted of, I think it was 27 different case studies. And those case studies were using we were using a very simple diffuser, which was just a little stilling well with a little glass nebulizer and an air pump. And so that was the beginning. And in all of the data that's at the end of at the back of the book, there are tables that show that I'll call them the exotic species of mold, like Stachybotrys saccharum and Aspergillus. That nice, pretty blue thing on the front cover there is actually an Aspergillus mold growth, and magnified, of course. And the data show that the exotic ones that cause health problems, were still gone after 2 weeks. And then I did hundreds of cases in 4 different states in the central part of the U.S. And then later by long distance, by just consulting with cleaning companies and mold remediators, even in Europe and Canada and other places, and we found that it was very effective, and it had 2 wonderful aspects that the things that were being used in the industry at that time didn't. One was that the oils were non-toxic. Now, some people have reactions to oils, but that's generally not because they're toxic. In fact, the oils were designed more for health enhancement. And so that's the opposite of what was being used in the industry at the time, which were mostly toxic chemicals that had to do their work and then dissipate before human beings could take up residence again. So it had the 2 important aspects that were unique, and that was, well, there were several, but the first two that I noticed was the residual effect and the fact that you really didn't have to worry about dissipation because they were non-toxic. And then there were other aspects that we found as we worked. And over the years, the only time it didn't work was when people didn't follow the protocol. And that, of course, is true with anything you do. So that's the story. And it continues. People continue to use this all across this country and around the world now, wherever essential oils are available.
Well, thank you, Dr. Close. And I think the combination of the diffusing technology and how I'm fascinated by the fact that this diffuser is so appropriate for mold because of its ability to put the molecules in the air and have them engulf the mold spore and hang, or what was the phrase you used? When the mold spore is it doused or hung? What is it?
Yes, good question. What my suspicion was early on was that the oils digested, is the word that I used, digested the cell walls or the mold spores, and even the hypha, the growth would be affected. It would take, the growth usually would, many times where there was a lot of mold, it would just sort of liquefy the mold growth, the hypha. And so you would have, it sometimes looked almost like ink. It would be running down the walls after the treatment, after the intense treatment. And of course, the point was to reach saturation and that's, as I mentioned, reach saturation and maintain that for long enough to dissolve, in effect, the mold spores and kill the growth on surfaces at the same time. And so that was another advantage of this method. A lot of the methods that are out there were designed either specifically for killing mold on surfaces or for killing mold spores in the air, like UV and some of the other methods of killing mold spores. This did it all with the one application, as long as it was, and my reason for thinking that the would do that, what was happening was that the oils were in effect digesting the walls of the mold spores, was because the walls of a mold spore are composed of a material called chitin. This is, to me, was a kind of a fascinating thing because at one time, you know, there were only three categories of things. There was animal, vegetable, and mineral. And turned out that fungi are kind of a borderline entity that has some aspects of both plant and animal. Up until the 1960s, I think, people thought of mold as being part of the plant kingdom because they seemed to act and have the physical aspects of plants. But this material chitin is actually the same material that comprises the shells of shrimp, lobsters, and the exoskeletons of insects like spiders. So the oils actually, and another clue for me was that you never want to store oils in plastic containers, because over time, the oils, depending on which organic compounds, which specific oils or blends you're dealing with, the oils will dissolve plastic. So I thought, well, if it dissolves plastic, chitin is very much like plastic, except it's a living material. So perhaps that's what's going on. So I devised some experiments to test that hypothesis. And I found that it actually was happening, because what I did was in a house that had a very serious mold infestation. I took surface samples on counters and on carpets and so forth before the treatment, and I also had the analysis done in the laboratory of determining what species were alive in terms of mold spores on surfaces and in the air. And I did the same thing after, and they found no mold spores. So this told me that the mold spores weren't just killed, they were actually dissolved or digested or turned into other compounds, other chemical compounds that dissipated in the atmosphere or on the surfaces, because the spores just no longer existed. That was one of the questions that came up. People said, well, we know that dead mold spores can cause respiratory problems and allergic type reactions and so forth. So just the fact that you killed the mold spores maybe isn't sufficient to say that the mold problem has been resolved. So it was rather important to show that there were no dead mold spores, that the mold spores had been disintegrated or dissolved or digested.
Very important. You did such good work in your research, Dr. Close. Now, everyone's being very polite and very silent. And I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So I might just open it up to questions, because I'm sure we've got a few. Yeah, hi, Lee. Okay.
Can I say thank you very much? It was really informative and a lot to ingest, and thank you again. I had two questions, if it's all right, if I may ask. The first one, you mentioned that we talked about bactericides that were being used in the hospitals and weren't working. Was it atypical or typical growth of the spores are growing when being used with that bacterial side?
Sorry, Lee, I didn't understand the question.
In the initial testing of the oils, the essential oil, prior to that, it was mentioned that they use hospital grade products to try to eradicate the mold, and it didn't work, and it just came back. My question is that, did it grow faster using those products, or was it delayed growth based on the chemicals used, those hospital grade chemicals?
the what we found was when you use bleach, for example, which was the common thing that everybody used years ago. In fact, the environmental people in the government recommended using bleach if you had under a certain amount in terms of square footage of infestation of mold growth, that you could just clean it up with bleach. But what we found was that yes, bleach will kill mold, as will many of the cleaners and bactericides and so forth. But if the conditions aren't remediated, if the conditions aren't changed, the conditions are still there for mold growth, it will rebound. With bleach, we found that within 24 hours, it would begin to rebound, because mold is like all fungi. They, you can go out into the forest and look for mushrooms, and you can walk through one area and there's nothing there, and you can come back an hour or two later and there are mushrooms growing. And so the fungi is like that. It literally grows within a few hours or days. And that was what was happening with bleach and with some of the other bactericides. So the fact that the oils had this residual effect was very important. I don't know, does that, am I answering your question, or am I not understanding it? So?
That's kind of more or less what I knew and expected, but there was no measurement that it was growing faster than it would normally grow, or because of it didn't actually kill it, but it was using it as food to grow faster rather than dying off or delaying its growth.
Yeah, that I understand. That is a good question, because mold is ubiquitous in the environment. So it actually will, with any treatment, there's always the possibility of it coming back if you have the proper conditions of humidity and the ambient, the mold spores that are in the ambient air or in the soil. And so what, in that regard, you could say that any treatment is not absolute, and you could say that it slows the recovery, and so it's a matter of the residual effect of the oils, the fact that you don't have to worry about them dissipating because they're non-toxic. That's the whole concept of toxicity is a complex one, and how it affects human health is also complex. Just exactly what is an allergic reaction and that sort of thing that you get into. And unfortunately, we have to rely on the human immune system, because you can never have 100%. It's kind of like the thing with the COVID. To try to get to zero infections of COVID is not going to happen. It just isn't possible because of the ubiquitousness of the virus. Well, it's the same way with mold. Mold is a part of the natural environment that, if you'll excuse the use of the word design, I happen to believe that an intelligent design, I think there's proof of that now. And the design is for mold is it performs a function of breaking down organic compounds, living compounds, plant and animal. And so they arrived on the scene at about the same time the plants did. And the job was plant material is returned to soil, if you will, by the activity of bacteria and mold. So it's a natural thing. The only thing is, mold is very much an organism of opportunity. It's an opportunistic organism in that it will break down plant and animal material without regard to whether that plant or animal is still alive or not. So that's how it causes disease and discomfort. It's just trying to do its job after the plant or the animal dies. It breaks down the organic compounds to return to humus, a natural part of the soil for subsequent plant and animal growth. So it's a natural process. So you're not going to eliminate it. In fact, you wouldn't want to, but you are in effect really delaying the process and protecting the residents of a building from being attacked by mold, causing problems. So in effect, you are slowing down the natural process. So that's a good point.
Dr. Close, I think one of the things that I've used often in speaking with many of you is that with the natural mold solution, we reset the environment and we establish a neutral baseline from mold, and that the need to keep using the protocol, it's a bit like, when you have dinner, you have to do your dishes. Unless you stop the initial water event happening in the environment. So if you've got a leak in the roof and you don't fix that leak, every time it rains and there's dust in the home, you are going to have mold in the environment. And that's when you're going to need to put the protocol in place, use the diffuser, diffuse, and then clean using the household cleaners. And I think most of you on this call are familiar with the Thieves household cleaner and in fact using it. And you can see its effectiveness as it wipes mold off of the surfaces. Now, it doesn't remove mold from the air. The overall problem is still floating around on the air, and the only way to address that is to use the diffuser. And that's why the natural mold solution comes with a kit, which includes the diffuser, the oils, the Enyo cloth, and Kate is our Enyo expert, whom we know and love, and all of the PPE and the components to actually do the 24-hour reset. And we've got Glenn doing a magnificent job trying to do mold cleans over most of Sydney and Newcastle and anywhere else his arms can reach. So it's a community and an understanding of the world of mold, right? Mold is everywhere. Australian mold, doesn't matter. Australian mold, US mold, European mold, they're all the same thing. They all have the same cycle. And the diffuser, and Sheila's in Japan, bless her, dealing with cleaning with a smile these days, I understand, Sheila.
Yes, with all my new Enyo products, I'm enjoying it.
So Kate is actually organizing now Enyo deliveries all over the world. Just reach out to her. Yeah, and Australia mold is mold. Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the purpose of there's probably not enough emphasis put on that in the book, because at the time, the discovery was the impact that it had through the intensive application. But there is a mention of the maintenance protocol, and it was mostly in the cases where a lot of people have older homes that you really cannot totally eliminate the excess moisture for whatever reason without, tearing the whole house down and starting over. There are, it gets expensive. So the maintenance program is shown to actually save money over the what would have to be done otherwise, because, for instance, if there are cracks in the basement wall, it's fairly expensive to do things like really seal those cracks, or to go on the outside of the basement wall and put in a drainage system to keep water from building up there in the first place. So it can be extremely expensive, and the maintenance program was designed to keep the mold from rebounding. But that's quite right. Mold only needs excess moisture, a nutrient of some sort, which is ubiquitous again, dust in the air.
Dust and it kicks off.
Or organic particulate matter, so forth. Just the byproducts of living, food that's dropped on the floor and things like that, spills that happen. So it's a part of maintenance, and that's, people need to understand that, because it's interesting to me that most of the people who came to me to have help with the mold problem wouldn't have had that problem if they had recognized it at an earlier stage and did things to prevent it. For instance, I've worked with architects who point out that there are a lot of building practices that actually promote mold growth, and that in fact you can find a mold problem in a new house that's just been built because they failed to make sure the plywood was dry before it was installed and sealed into the walls and that sort of thing. So there are remedies that should be taken before, but so someone doing mold remediation can work with architects and carpenters and construction workers to eliminate some of these problems. But it's an ongoing problem, and it's a maintenance problem, just like Nora said. It's like the cleanup you have to do in your house. You have to wash the dishes, you have to wash clothes. That's just an ongoing part of being a living, breathing human being. So it shouldn't surprise anybody that there would be maintenance would be a problem. Now, from the point of view of the person who's providing the service, that means a repeat customer. But I'd like to point out to people too that this method actually is less expensive than most of the methods that were prevalent in the industry prior to the use of essential oils. I've seen cases where I've saved people thousands of dollars because they have the contemporary mold remediation people come in, and they have to create a negative air pressure. They have to have air scrubbers. They have to replace, and they make their money primarily by remodeling your home, by ripping out wall materials and replacing them and so forth. Whereas this is a method that, while it won't eliminate that, it will minimize it. I had, for instance, a Department of Transportation office in my home state of Missouri, where they were going to have to take out, I had, I think, 5 or 6 different offices that had mold infestation of the walls. And this was a relatively new building. It had the problem from day one because it was a typical flat roof construction that was so popular and still is in commercial buildings and so forth, that actually almost always leak. Because if you've got a flat roof with your air handling equipment up on top of that flat roof, and you have maintenance men up there working on the air handling equipment, they're walking on the roof, and that and heating and cooling and weather, they almost always leak, and the leakage goes down inside the walls quite often, and the mold growth establishes itself there. So this method actually eliminates the expense of totally remodeling this particular Department of Transportation offices. They were going to remove basically the drywall in these offices and replace it, and treat the inside of the walls. And they only had to do a small fraction of that, of what they were planning to do before they did the diffusing with essential oils. So I don't remember the exact number because it's been several years ago, but they saved on the order of $8,000 or $10,000 by using this method.
It's an amazing, when you understand how this method fits in, because it is a reset of the environment. I hesitate to call it mold remediation because I tend to think of that as construction and the repair and renovation. What I'm finding in my experience with the solution is that it's for people that are living in their homes and need to keep living there, that don't have the luxury of doing the renovation, that don't have the luxury of moving out, that have to wait for other people, whether it's insurance agents or strata managers or landlords, to sign off on getting a repair done. The fact that you can get the kit and you can look after your own welfare and that of your family. Because as some of us know, and most of us that have done the mold course, 24.5% of people are missing a gene that allows them to deal with the inflammation that mold can cause. So out of a family of 4, you're going to have one person, and typically it's mom, that gets unwell in living in this environment, but everyone else is fine. So that creates its own dynamics within the family. But the person that isn't well, unless they get some help or they move or they get some assistance from a doctor of some kind to balance out their body systems, they can then, their immune system gets decoyed, looking after that low hum of mold infection or mold contamination, and that takes its eye off the job of looking after the body. So a lot of people that have lived in homes that have chronic mold problems in them will also have chronic health disease. over time. And the list of disease and ill health that mold can be found to be the basis of is long and getting longer. So to be able to reset your environment, to be able to use a natural solution. I know there was some comment, Dr. Close, that using the therapeutic grade oils with the envelope, there's a resinous water porous envelope that goes onto bathrooms, you know, for waterproofing a bathroom. They have a material that they put in the bathroom to waterproof it. And there was comment made that when you use the oils, you can actually degrade that waterproofing substance. And I don't know if you've got any comment on that. I know I tend to think that it's not going to be dense enough or intense enough to do damage if it's used respectfully, but I'm not a builder and I'm not an environmental engineer, so I don't know what your comments would be on that, good sir.
Yeah, I think you're right in that, and people who raise this question are right too, but it's a matter of degree and a matter of time that it takes, and we have to realize that we're all dealing with what physicists call entropy. Entropy is the natural tendency of things to degrade. And so whatever kind of protection you have is naturally going to degrade over time. Now, will the oils in the environment increase that? Incrementally. If you were doing 24-hour intensive diffusing over and over again, it would conceivably have a significant effect. But using that once and then using the maintenance program, I don't think it's going to speed that up that much. It's kind of like the idea that, oh, don't ever put essential oils in a plastic bottle. Yeah, in absolute sense, that it could degrade that plastic, and you get the compounds from plastic that are actually can be detrimental to human health. However, you don't get them just by, let's say you put you have an infusion oil and water, or you put a couple of drops of peppermint oil in your drinking water. It's not going to dissolve very much plastic in a short length of time that you might be using that. So an absolutist would say, oh, it'll break down these things and deteriorate them. And yes, it will, but the amount and the length of time, and in the environmental industry, in environmental management, you have to be more of a relativist than an absolutist. You have to realize that there are thresholds. For example, in a toxic chemical, you cannot absolutely eliminate them. And in fact, in the same way with germs or bacteria and so forth, and mold. In fact, you wouldn't want to, because if you do that, you have the situation where the natural immune system of a human being is no longer functional, because it doesn't have a below that threshold that would cause morbidity or extreme disease. if you absolutely eliminate like the idea of the bubble boy, who lives in an enclosed environment with filters and air and everything, if your immune system doesn't work, then you're going to be, this again, I can make the analogy with
No,
COVID.
no, 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 no. We're not going there. We're not doing it. So,
Well,
guys, it's quarter
the
after
point-
9. No, it's
the
quarter
point-
after 9.
the
We're
point
running
is
late.
that your natural immune system is important to maintain, and that's part of maintenance. That's all I'm saying.
And you're allowed, Dr. Close. I'm being really mean because we've run over time.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. That's people. I used to say, "Oh, I'm going to have to talk for an hour." Well, one of my students one time said, "You could talk for 2 hours about anything. Just name it."
I
And
know.
so I take that as a compliment.
I know. You're good. You're good. Now, I'm just going to check. Does anyone on the call have a question? James, do you have? Now is the time. Now is the time. If you have any questions.
Yeah, I noticed there's a book that I'm not familiar with, and I think I will give it a read because from a building biology point of view, I need to see stacks of data because the building biology
Protocol.
fundamental right now is you must remove and remediate and pull it all out and get it right down to the source. And in their eyes of the building biologist, there is no kind of halfway point where you just keep cleaning. You got to really remove it. So I see this product as something that can keep it at bay longer than a deep clean. It doesn't continue to dissolve things all the way to the source without you pulling things apart, I think. So, but it does really seem to offer a great solution because there's a lot of people in a rental situation, a lot of reasons why you can't rip things apart, and building biologists are a bit purist in that sense. So there's a huge practical hole that this fills, and fulfills a need. So I will read a lot, and it has to have lots of data to back it up. And also the other point is it's not toxic, but people are looking towards it for health reasons. So is there any kind of data on, does it create any kind of health problems in anyone in particular at all? Is it completely safe for everyone? So, if that's all in the book, I know I'll get in touch with Nora. I'd like to read that, yes.
Good, because questions are healthy. And, James, I welcome the opportunity to work with you on this, because one of the things the natural mold solution does in the kit that I'm doing now, I'd love to put a protocol together where we did a surface sample of before and after, or if we could do an air sample of before and after and create that as a package. So there could be a test done. So Dr. Close, when he's in the US, the testing protocol is $40 per test. That's the cost of doing testing. And, Dr. Close nearly fell over when I said, well, in Australia, it's $150 a test or $110 a test to get samples done. So the different costs really prohibit one's enthusiasm to do too much testing. But I'd love to put a protocol out there where we could do our own case studies. So that's something, James, we can have a conversation about, please, later on this week, and see if we can get creative. Because I think there's a bridge to be built here of support and understanding, because anyone who's in a rental situation is suffering. And we've got a lot of people in Australia that are suffering right now and around the world. And the health implications, the oils are therapeutic grade oils. So there's a full archive and library on the virtue of each oil and the precautions that people need to take when they're around them. and it recognizes some people have a reaction to oils, other people don't. It's a personal response. And in the protocol that Dr. Close put together with Jacqui, they were very clear in saying that people should be exposed to the oils for no more than 15 to 20 minutes as a maximum, but you could live in the home. So in other words, you could actually diffuse in the bathroom and in the laundry area, and you could go in there and have your shower and be okay with confidence for 15 to 20 minutes. If you chose to stand longer in the bathroom, that was your choice, but always listen to your body. So if your body's saying, I'm not comfortable, I want to move, take it out of the bathroom. You know, don't spend an hour in the bathroom. Spend 15 to 20 minutes. So I don't think I would be uncomfortable saying there's a guarantee that everyone is going to have a positive reaction to the oils, because there's always someone that has a sensitivity or this isn't the right thing. So I'm always going to encourage common sense and listening to your body and being comfortable. So, but we can go through that again in more detail as well, James. No problems, and I welcome that. So
Yeah, let me
Yep.
let me add and say that in my experience, you're only talking about 1 or 2% of the population that will be sensitive to some of the oils. And as you work with this and learn, you can find alternatives. For instance, I had a lady in the state of Kentucky who had a reaction to cinnamon. Cinnamon is the one what we consider a hot oil in the blend, and the thieves blend. And but like I said, that's like 1 or 2% of people. So there are alternatives. For instance, we found that with her and with other people with that problem, that sensitivity, we could go to lemongrass oil, which is a fairly inexpensive oil and actually works for most of the mold species quite well.
So there's conversation to be had, and we're not going to do it now.
Yeah.
Because I'm very naughty. We're now an hour and 20. Everyone is giving up their evening so graciously, and they're moaning, because I know, Toko, your days are very full and very busy. I know everyone's days are full and busy, but I do love it when we get together, guys. It is awesome to see you here and be on the call. And you know, Dr. Close has actually gotten up at 4:30 this morning to be with us on this call. I know.
Yeah, to make matters worse, I got confused and thought it was yesterday, and I was up at 4:30 yesterday, and until I realized, oh, I'm a day off. So so this is my second morning, but that's a small price to pay.
Well, and you know, we're very lucky, guys, because I think if we ask Dr. Close, he'll come back and have another conversation. And I know what I'm finding after these calls, each time there's another nugget that sinks in. It gets a little clearer. Yeah. So it's wonderful to see familiar faces. And we know we can invite those people that also are sharing a passion or a journey with mold. Yeah. There will be a recording. I'm going to share it out to all of you, and we will share it around to everyone who wanted to be here today and couldn't be. And maybe, Dr. Close, the next time that we do this call, I'm going to make a little note. And I know you had a lot of experience firsthand with Gary, and we might ask you to share the story, your favorite story of an adventure with Gary. But we're not going to do it on this call. We are not doing it. We're not doing it. But it will be a treat for the next call.
Time is only an illusion, but it's a very persistent one.
I'm in. I'm
I'm
suckered completely.
Quoting Einstein, he said, time is an illusion, but it's very persistent.
Yeah, it's a big winner. We've all drunk that Kool-Aid. So everyone, thank you so much for attending tonight. It's a delight you're here. There will be another call. There's going to be another living mold-free course as well. So reach out if you would like to participate or if you know someone that would. Depending on the response, we'll take a look at whether it's in July or August. And Dr. Close is so supportive. I have to say thank you for creating the solution, for being supportive of the natural mold solution and supporting all of us here on the call. It really is a great gift. Thank you. Okay, guys,
That's what we're here for.
it's definitely what you're here for.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night, guys.
Again, thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Good night, Heather. I hope you're feeling better. I hope you're feeling better.